But we begin this morning with former Vice President Joe Biden receiving a warm welcome to the presidential race yesterday in the form of congressional endorsements. 10 members of the House and Senate, mostly from Pennsylvania and Delaware, quickly endorsed his White House bid, while a few more attended a fundraiser for him last night without officially backing him. Biden also got an early endorsement in the first primary state of New Hampshire from popular former Governor John Lynch. And CNBC reports that New York's current Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo is throwing his powerful fundraising network behind Biden. Meanwhile, Joe Biden said he did not seek the endorsement of another prominent Democrat.
If you are the best choice for the Democrats in 2020, why didn't President Obama endorse you?
I asked President Obama not to endorse, and he doesn't want to. Whoever wins this nomination should win it on their own merits.
Sir, why you?
Welcome to Delaware.
All right, so Willie, pretty good day yesterday for Joe Biden.
Yeah, I mean, he had the response to the video was good. The rollout was good. The President of the United States welcomed Joe Biden to the race, calling him Sleepy Joe Biden. We did see, though, Joe, the first attacks on him, not attacks, but the first criticism of him from Bernie Sanders, who put out a fundraising email kind of going after in a sideways way Joe Biden for having a fundraiser with corporate lobbyists as one of his first acts of the campaign. We heard from Elizabeth Warren also going after Joe Biden for his, in her view, support of banks in financial crisis and passing along legislation that she'd been in a very public fight with him over a couple of decades, actually. So we're seeing the opening salvos in what will be the progressive lane, owned so far by Bernie Sanders and also occupied by Elizabeth Warren, going after Joe Biden, who's going to try to occupy, John Howman, a bigger space that trends toward the center.
He has been the only of the 20 Democrats who are running for president. He's the only one who has put Donald Trump at the center of his campaign. And there's the one attribute that you have to give Biden credit for yesterday was that video made very clear what the central rationale for his candidacy is. And I think that's to his credit. There's no one who walks away from that video not understanding what it is Joe Biden's about, which is, I'm the guy who can best take on Donald Trump, and we must defeat Donald Trump to restore the country.
Well, of course, Susan, the New York Times led with the Anita Hill story that Joe Biden called to apologize to Anita Hill. She didn't accept Biden's apology and says that Biden now needs to apologize to women across America because he may have hugged them inappropriately.
Well, I don't think that Joe Biden, given his long career in government, he cannot start this out on an apology tour. He can say that, explain the decisions he made when he did and what's happened since, and how, if you want to say he's evolved or, gone on a listening tour or something like that. But he cannot start apologizing out of the gate. And to John Howman's point, I think that gate that he came out of, going against Donald Trump and showing that he is the one to take him on, and that strength was kind of part of that argument. You can say everything else you want about my record, but you cannot deny, at least right now, I am the best one to take on Donald Trump.
And Donnie Deutsch, that does seem to be the belief by many people. What do you make, though, of Joe Biden calling Anita Hill not accepting the apology, and then saying he needs to apologize to the rest of the women in America because of these stories that came out before? Should Biden just move on now that he's made the apology call?
It's not necessarily this specific issue. In terms of how is he going to address all of some of the things in terms of banking, some of the things in terms of criminal reform? And I think the answer for Biden is he's not a flip-flopper. If you go at age 47, then you change your views at 48. 77-year-old men, just like 60-year-old men, we do think and act differently than 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's okay to say, I made mistakes then. I thought of the world this way then. This is the way I think it now. I think Americans are evolved enough to understand that when you have a 40, 50-year record, you're going to be able to look back and say, Jesus, as a 43-year-old guy, that was pretty dumb. And I think that's going to be the playbook across the board. What was so strong about him yesterday, and yes, he is the best, or certainly one of the best anti-Trumps, both in terms of stature. I always go, what do they look like up on stage against Trump? He's large. He has a great presence. But the one word that came through yesterday that is, to me, from a tactic point of view or human description point of view, is compassion. That's what came across as a human. You know, it's so ironic that we talk about him always giving hugs. That was kind of a big hug to the country, in effect. And to me, if that compassion shows through in everything he does, whereas I have not felt in the gut about any of the candidates emotionally as much as I felt yesterday. That was a right brain move. Now, of course, going forward, all the left brain chunks in terms of policy have got to be in there. But for him, you could not have started in a better place.
Totally agree. Yeah. There are two candidates that stand out to me as ready to face Trump. President Trump is responding to the core message of former Vice President Joe Biden's candidacy. He tweeted about him and questioned his intelligence. And then Trump told Fox News that he disagrees with the premise of Biden's announcement video.
We are in the battle for the soul of this nation. I believe history will look back on 4 years of this president and all he embraces as an aberrant moment in time.
When Biden makes the statement talking about the soul, I mean, the soul, take a look at the Obama. You know, I heard somebody say before that there was such dissension and division. People forget there was tremendous division during the Obama administration, tremendous division. We actually have great spirit right now. And, you know, just to finish that off, we are a country respected again.
So,
no, actually, everything he just said there was actually false, except for the fact, Mika, that there were divisions during the Obama era, but he took a bad situation and made it worse.
Well, and Gene Robinson, I think what Trump's tweets and his sound bites on Fox about Biden's rollout video gave us the chance to show America exactly what he was talking about and put those sound bites side by side and hear Biden talking about the soul of America and choosing his words so carefully, and then an idiot riffing with absolutely no intelligence or preparation based behind it. What do you want, America? Here it is, side by side. Take a look, take a listen, make your choice.
Yeah, if you were, you know, in court, you know, a defense attorney or whatever, you'd say, Your Honor, I rest my case after those statements.
Yeah.
But of course, Joe Biden can't rest his case. I think it was. I really liked the announcement video. I thought putting the crisis at you know, at center stage. We must get rid of Donald Trump. He is doing tremendous damage to the country. Potentially lasting damage to the country if he's allowed to stay in office an additional 4 years. It will be much, much worse. And you know, to paint himself as the guy who can stop the madness, who can end this, and who can get us back on a course where we can have intelligent debate about healthcare policy and about foreign policy and about defense spending and all the things that we should argue about, rather than dealing with this, you know, this lunatic in the White House, this family of grifters that have attached themselves like leeches to you know, to the White House. It's incredible. So I thought that was good, and I agree with something that Donnie said. You can picture Joe Biden up on the debate stage next to Donald Trump, you know, giving better than he gets, right? He's not going to shrink from Trump. He's not going to look small. He's not going to look insubstantial in the least, and he's not going to look intimidated. And and you know, that's important. I think those sort of nonverbal cues are important.
Joe, for all the litmus test questions floating through this Democratic primary right now on the Green New Deal and Medicare for all and reparations and everything that the candidates are being asked, those policy questions will be there. But I think what Joe Biden did yesterday was to tap into something more visceral, as Donnie says, in the country, what people are feeling in their gut. Do you really want to keep going this way for 4 more years, is effectively what he was saying. When you go to dinner parties or you go to bars and you talk to people, they don't feel great about the way things are going in the country right now, the way way we talk to each other, the tone of the country right now. And I think that's what he was speaking to. He'll get to all those policy questions. He'll have some hard questions. He'll stumble. We know that from time to time. But what he was saying yesterday is, we don't want 4 more years of this, and I'm the guy who can put a stop to it. And even the polls, as we showed yesterday, tell that story as well, having him up by 8 points in one poll.
Well, and that's really, if he can stay on message, and if that can remain his message, and if he can take cues from Nancy Pelosi on how Nancy Pelosi has every time something's come up that she's believed would run off the suburban voters that put Democrats in charge in the House of Representatives, to give them the subpoena power to actually push Donald Trump on a lot of issues. If Joe Biden follows that playbook, that's very good news. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.